So, ladies and gentlemen, and the it's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to Medanta Icon Cardiology today and tomorrow virtual session number 9 on the occasion of the World Hypertension Week, May 17 to 21st, 2021. Dr. Tiny, as you remember, this is a meeting that we do every year in April called Medanta Icon Cardiology today and tomorrow, where we have a heady mix of echocardiography, clinical cardiology, and preventive cardiology as well. And you're kind enough to grace our meeting on many occasions. This is an important meeting today because May 17th traditionally is the World Hypertension Day, and the week following that is the Hypertension Week. The theme this year, and has been there for the last 1 year, has measure your blood pressure correctly, control it, and live longer. I mean, thematically, if you look at this, it's just an unbelievably well thought of theme. And as we are almost a hypertension capital of the world, we need it more than anybody else. And obviously, to discuss this, we have three very, very eminent members of my department today under your chairmanship. So this theme is ideal, and therefore, this afternoon I have a galaxy of well-known speakers from my department. And to chair this session is Dr. Tiny Nair, my very good friend, a very positive physician, a very good teacher. I'm not using these adjectives just to sound good, but I actually mean it. Why? Because I've known of Dr. Nair for years together, and there are many meetings that we have actually worked together and spoken together and exchanged notes together. So Dr. Tiny Nair is not only a good friend, a very positive physician, a researcher and teacher, but he has done tremendous work in the field of systemic hypertension. And currently, he's the head of department of cardiology at the PRS Hospital Trivandrum. And as he very rightly said, that 70% in these difficult times of his hospitals already taken over for COVID patients. But obviously, things are improving. Kerala has also come out of a big storm, and with him at the helm of affairs. And if you look at his CV, he has got a Best Doctor Award, Inspiring Doctor of India. And that's what inspires me. That a person, most of us have done the RMD, DMs, and papers, but to be an inspiration for younger generation, that's the most important thing. He's also on the editorial board of many leading journals. And with these few words, otherwise I would be speaking about you for the next 45 minutes, Dr. Nair. I hand over this podium to you, and to take it forward. And with you are some of my best people of my department who've not only done majorly work in echocardiography, but are also astute clinicians. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tiny Nair.
Thank you, Dr. Kasliwal, for that nice words of introduction. I always think that in an era, in a world where cardiology is dominated by interventional cardiology, PCIs, rotablation, complex procedures, I think the field of preventive cardiology lives and continues to grow simply because there are people like Dr. Ravi Kasliwal and Dr. Manish Bansal who are there behind preventive cardiology, which is so very important, right? When we take a patient in the cath lab with a complex problem, it is the end stage of a disease. And unless we prevent the disease, we are just doing probably patchwork. So in that background, organizing a meeting today on World Hypertension Day and Hypertension Week is extremely important. And thank you for doing so. To start with, we should understand that hypertension is a very big problem, whether you are north, south, east, or west of India. The recent data shows about 30% of our population hypertension, 30%. And one of these recent data we got from Kerala says that about 43% of the urban Keralite, imagine 43% of urban Keralite is hypertensive, And we know the 1/3 rule, that 1/3 of us are not even aware that we are hypertensive, 1/3 are not treated properly, and only 1/3 go to goal, which brings about 10 to 12% of people reaching goal at all. So we are not doing good work, and this area needs a lot of attention. We have also understood that our traditional thinking that the patient comes, check BP, go home, it does not work at all, because blood pressure is something that is feedback dependent. And we started understanding that some people will be extremely scared in front of the physician, white coat hypertension. But today we understood white coat is nothing. We are looking at a small snapshot in our clinic of a disease or a physiology that spans 24/7, 365. Right. So we need to do the whole picture, and that is how hypertension has gone out of office. So I think in today's very important symposium, which is focusing on the World Hypertension Week, we have talks on out of office hypertension. And I think the first talk is on home blood pressure measurement, which is the topic is home blood pressure measurement, the new gold standard. The talk will be given by Dr. Mansi Kaushik. Dr. Kaushik is a consultant in the at Medanta. Clinical and preventive cardiology is a specialty. She is massive. I think 24 years of experience I see in her CV. Plenty of articles, chapters written, speeches delivered in multiple meetings. She is the co-editor of the Journal of Clinical and Preventive Cardiology, which is headed by Dr. Kasliwal. And she is also involved in teaching, a part of the faculty for the DNB in cardiology. So Dr. Mansi Kaushik, please talk to us about home blood pressure, the new gold standard. Dr. Mansi, please. Mansi comes online. The next topic is even more important, which is about ambulatory blood pressure. We today are aware that ambulatory blood pressure is so very important and gives us the total picture of blood pressure 24/7. And we need to know the values and limitations of ambulatory blood pressure. To talk to us about ambulatory blood pressure, ABPM, is Dr. Hardeep Grewal. Dr. Hardeep Grewal is the consultant cardiologist at Medanta. She specializes in non-invasive cardiology. She is an expert in basic and advanced echocardiography, and she has multiple publications, again, in national and international journals, and a prolific speaker. Dr. Hardeep Grewal, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yeah, you're audible, Dr. Grewal, and your slides are visible.
First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Kasliwal for giving me this opportunity to present in this webinar. And I also thank Dr. Tiny Nair for the kind introduction. So today I'm going to talk about ambulatory BP monitoring, which is a very important method in blood pressure assessment, but it is grossly underutilized in clinical practice. So we all know that worldwide hypertension is one of the biggest factor responsible for cardiovascular mortality and morbidity, especially premature cardiovascular mortality. About 50% of the all coronary deaths are caused by hypertension, and about more than 60% of all strokes are caused by hypertension. So there are mainly two reasons for this. One, that the hypertension is widely prevalent, and the prevalence is on the rise, not only worldwide, but also in India. And another thing, that hypertension is poorly treated. So because of this, it is very important to identify hypertension and to manage hypertension to reduce the associated morbidity and mortality in these patients. But yes, at this point, we should understand that what is the best way to evaluate blood pressure in patients. Now, currently, we rely on office blood pressure measurement. Yes, we are familiar with this technique, and we have been using this for the last so many years. It's practical, it's easy. And of course, there's a lot of data supporting office blood pressure. But one thing we should not forget, that office blood pressure is not the true representation of a person's blood pressure. So as we can see in this picture, now we can be misled by believing, if we look at this picture, that this is a peaceful place, some very calm place where we would like to go. But it's only when we look at the complete picture, we come to realize that the picture is not that pleasant and that peaceful what it appeared initially, because what we saw was just a part of the picture. So similarly, when we check office blood pressure, it gives us, as Dr. Tiny Nair said in the introduction, that it gives us just a snapshot of person's blood pressure. It does not represent the whole picture. So in an individual, the blood pressure varies in 24 hours. It keeps on fluctuating. So when a person visits you in the OPD, he can come at any time in the OPD. He can come at this time, he can come at this time, or he can come at this time. So obviously the blood pressure reading in that person or that patient can be anything on this chart, which is not the true representation of that patient's blood pressure. Now, even if we have to rely on the office blood pressure, we have to remember that there are several precautions which we need to take when we check office blood pressure for accurate assessment of BP. There is a list of steps which we have to follow. But do you think that it's practical in our day-to-day busy schedule, in our busy OPDs where there's a lot of crowd, there are attendants, and I think we won't be able to finish our OPDs in time if we have to follow all these steps. So, um, to further, before I discuss further, I would like to share a few examples with you where ambulatory BP monitoring was very useful. Now, this is a patient who was 43-year-old male, recently diagnosed with hypertension. He was not taking any antihypertensive. So his office blood pressure was 150/90 when he visited us. So this patient was not very keen to start antihypertensive treatment because as per the patient, whenever he has checked blood pressure at home, it's always been in the normal range. So we really wanted to assess his true blood pressure status. So we did ambulatory BP monitoring in this patient. This is the blood pressure tracing over 24 hours in that patient. This above upper line is the systolic blood pressure and the lower line denotes the diastolic blood pressure. Now here we can see that most of his readings, they were within normal range. Average blood pressure was within normal limits. His daytime blood pressure, nighttime blood pressure was normal with pretty decent nocturnal dip. So this patient had high office blood pressure even in the past, but out of office, out of clinic blood pressure readings were normal over 24 hours. So this patient was a case of white coat hypertension. And now it is important because the patient who has white coat hypertension do not need antihypertensive treatment. We will discuss about it in the coming slides also. So another example where a patient was 50-year-old male, overweight, pre-diabetic with HbA1c of 6.3, dyslipidemia. So he got his test done as a part of routine checkup and he found urine routine microscopy showed 2+ proteinuria. So BP blood pressure was 130/70. So in the history, patient told us that there is history of intermittent high blood pressure readings, but he never took any antihypertensive for that. So in this patient, because there were multiple cardiovascular risk factor and because there was history of high blood pressure readings in the past, and there was evidence of proteinuria. So we did ambulatory BP monitoring in this patient, and we found that his average blood pressure was normal, and even the daytime blood pressure was also normal. But interestingly, we found that this patient had high nocturnal blood pressure, which is 133/78, and the cutoff is 120/70. So it was very high. Additionally, we also found that this patient had early morning surge, blood pressure going up to 180. So this patient was a case of nocturnal hypertension and early morning surge. So if we had relied just on daytime BP, we would have missed this diagnosis. So this patient, so the diagnosis of nocturnal hypertension and this finding of early morning surge could be detected only because of ABPM. And the high blood pressure at night and early morning surge, they have very strong prognostic significance, which we will discuss. Then there is, this is another example. Patient 50-year-old on multiple antihypertensives, office blood pressure reading was 160/100. Now, because he was already on treatment, already taking multiple antihypertensives, so we wanted to be sure that is it just a white coat effect or are we dealing with resistant kind of hypertension? So this is the blood pressure tracing in this patient over 24 hours, and we can see that his blood pressure was above the cutoff value throughout the 24-hour period at daytime as well as at nighttime with reverse dipping. And so this was a patient of uncontrolled hypertension. So this patient definitely needs adjustment or up titration in the antihypertensives. So we have seen that ambulatory BP monitoring, it provides a lot of information to us. It gives us tells us about average 24-hour BP of a patient, average daytime BP, average nighttime BP, the dipping status of the blood pressure at night, early morning surge, and the blood pressure variability over a period of 24 hours, and also tells us about the heart rate of the patient. Now, Dr. Mansi will discuss later on, but nighttime blood pressure and the dipping status and morning surge can only be diagnosed with the help of ABPM. And whereas rest of the parameters can also, we can have some idea from home BP monitoring also, but not about the nighttime status. So what do we do when we ask the patient to go for ambulatory BP monitoring? We have a device which consists of two parts. There is a inflatable cuff which patient wears in the non-dominant arm, and then there is a device, a battery device with which it is connected. Now there is automatic inflation of the BP cuff over a period of 24 hours every 30 minutes, and patient is asked to maintain a log of activities, a diary kind of thing, that at what time he got up and at what time he slept, at what time he took his medicines, and what time he had his meal, and if there were any symptoms in these 24 hours. And patient is asked to perform his routine activities, but he should avoid excessive physical exertion. Now, once we have the blood pressure readings from the ambulatory BP monitoring, then how do we interpret them? Now, the cutoff value above which we consider that the patient has hypertension is 140/90. This is what we have been following for last so many years, and this is what has been recommended by European guidelines also. But if for the cutoff value for ambulatory BP monitoring, the 24-hour average mean blood pressure, the cutoff is more than, if the blood pressure is more than 130/80, then we consider it hypertension. And for daytime blood pressure, the cutoff is 5 millimeter of mercury higher. And for nighttime blood pressure, the cutoff is 10 millimeter of mercury lower than the mean blood pressure. Now, if we have to follow ACC/AHA guideline, then the cutoffs are lower in comparison to the European guidelines. And for home BP monitoring, the cutoff is same as that for daytime ambulatory BP monitoring. Now, how do we use ambulatory ABPM values in perspective, in context with in context of office BP values? Now, if a patient has normal office blood pressure and ambulatory BP is also normal, then that patient is labeled as patient. Then that patient has true normotension. He doesn't have hypertension. But if a patient has high office BP and high ABPM values, then that patient has sustained hypertension. Whereas if patient has normal office BP but high outside clinic BP findings, then the patient is labeled as a case of masked hypertension. And exactly opposite of masked hypertension is white coat hypertension, where if the blood pressure in the office, as we have discussed in the example also, blood pressure in the office is high, but outside clinic blood pressure findings are normal. So we have seen that ABPM can help not only in confirming the diagnosis of hypertension, but it also helps in excluding the diagnosis of white coat hypertension. Now, white coat hypertension, the prevalence is somewhere between 10 to 15%, and in some population it may be as high as 35%. Now, the important thing about white coat hypertension is that the cardiovascular risk is not that high in white coat hypertension, but at the same time we should remember that about 1 to 5% of the patients who have white coat hypertension, they go on to develop sustained hypertension. So these patients do not need antihypertensive treatment, but they definitely need lifestyle modification and they should be closely watching their blood pressure. Then another entity which is exactly opposite to white coat hypertension is masked hypertension. The prevalence is almost same as that of white coat hypertension. But in contrast, unlike white coat hypertension, the cardiovascular risk in masked hypertension is similar to that in patients with sustained hypertension. Now, as I just said that in masked hypertension, blood pressure is usually normal in the clinic. So many people will have normal blood pressure in the clinic. We won't be sending all of them for ABPM. So I would say that those patients who had blood pressure readings in the pre-hypertensive range, or they have history of intermittent high blood pressure, or patients who have evidence of target organ damage in the form of LVH or in the form of proteinuria or renal dysfunction, or patients who show exaggerated blood response to exercise, I think this subgroup of patients should definitely be screened for MASH hypertension through ABPM. Now, another important entity which we diagnose with the help of ABPM is nighttime status of the blood pressure. In fact, ABPM only diagnoses the nocturnal hypertension. Normally, under normal circumstances, physiologically, there is a fall in blood pressure when a person sleeps. So if there's a nocturnal BP fall of more than 10% of daytime values, that is known as Dipper pattern, and it is normal. But if the BP at night falls by less than 10% during nighttime, that is non-Dipper pattern. And if BP paradoxically increases at night, that is reverse Dipper pattern. Now, the significance is that patients who have non-Dipper pattern or who have reverse Dipper pattern, the cardiovascular mortality is much higher than those who show Dipper pattern at night. And the mortality in reverse Dipper is more than in those with non-Dipper pattern. So now we have we have a large amount of data from Indian population as well. This is a large multicentric study which was done recently, known as India ABPM study. And Dr. Tiny Nair was one of the lead investigators in this study. So this study gave us very important insights about BP patterns in Indian patients. More than 27,000 of subjects were enrolled, and OBPM, that is office blood pressure, as well as ambulatory BP monitoring was done in them, and the data was analyzed and compared. And it was found that white coat hypertension was found in 12% of the people, and MASH hypertension was seen in 19% of the patients, and more than 50% of the subjects had sustained hypertension. And almost 12% had isolated nighttime hypertension. Now, this finding signifies that checking just daytime BP is not enough to screen for hypertension. Then, if we look at these findings, we also derive that if we had relied just on OBPM, that is office blood pressure, we would have missed more than 50% of the people with hypertension. We would have wrongly diagnosed them either as not hypertensive or as hypertensive. So this signifies the importance of ambulatory BP monitoring in the management of patients with hypertension. Now, this study also showed that Indians have high prevalence of non-dippers. Almost 50% of the subjects, so they were non-dipper, and which we have shown very high cardiovascular mortality in these people. This is another study which is done at our own center under the guidance of Dr. Kasliwal. In this study, it was found that even patients who had controlled office blood pressure, even these people showed high blood pressure or blood pressure outside the normal range on ambulatory BP monitoring, and a substantial proportion of these people, they were non-dippers. So when to use ABPM finally? What are the indications? Any patient who has been who is newly diagnosed with hypertension, we do ABPM to exclude the diagnosis of white coat hypertension and to confirm the diagnosis of sustained hypertension. Second, any patient who has a history of pre-hypertension or intermittent high BP reading or evidence of target organ damage, or if there's multiple risk factors, please screen them for MASH hypertension, because the cardiovascular mortality is as high as in sustained hypertension. Then if a patient has high BP readings and on treatment, then to rule out white coat effect and to confirm the diagnosis of resistant hypertension, we need to do ABPM. Then to rule out some secondary causes, like as in patients with OSA, they have high prevalence of nocturnal hypertension. And then in pheochromocytoma, where there's episodic hypertension, ABPM can be helpful. So we have discussed, it is quite evident that ABPM is very useful. It has a lot of advantages, but it is not devoid of limitations. The most important limitation is that the patient discomfort. Sometimes patients feel very uncomfortable when the cuff is inflating, especially those who have very high blood pressure. Another limitation is the cost and availability. Yes, it is not available at many healthcare facilities. And then cost, yes, many patients are reluctant to undergo ABPM because of the cost issues. Yes, it is expensive in the short term, but I would say that in selected group of patients, it is cost effective in the long term. And very rarely patient may present with complications like skin rashes in the form of petechiae or contact dermatitis. And then sometimes there may be technical issues, there may be loss of data due to technical issues, or sometimes there are error due to improper cuff fitting. Then data may also be inaccurate if patient has exercised during ABPM or is driving, or sometimes if there are a lot of arrhythmias that can also impact the value of BP values. Then another thing that though now the guidelines have recently put a lot of emphasis on ABPM, but still we don't have that kind of data which we have for office blood pressure, because most of the recommendations and treatment goals are still based on office blood pressure, not on ABPM, and that may sometimes cause confusion in decision when we are taking decision for the patients. So finally, to conclude, I would say that ABPM is an indispensable tool in the management of hypertension, and it has an incremental value over and above the office blood pressure. And because it gives us information about the blood pressure of a patient over a 24-hour period. So it confirms the diagnosis of hypertension, but at the same time, it also uncovers white coat hypertension and masked hypertension. And then most importantly, ABPM tells us about the nocturnal hypertension, which has a very strong prognostic significance in cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. So I would like to end my presentation by a quote from a very famous scientist, J.S. Flores, that blood pressure measurement is one of the few areas in medical practice where patients in the 21st century are assessed almost universally using a methodology developed in 19th. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grewal. That was an excellent summary, especially your last slide. I liked it so much. You know, you covered masked hypertension, white coat hypertension, non-dipper, dipper status, and how night blood pressure reflects on the cardiovascular events. I think it's an extensive coverage, and beautifully you showed most of your own data as to the complex interpretation and as to whom to apply ambulatory blood pressure. We'll take the questions at the end because we have 2 more presentations. So Dr. Grewal, thank you for the presentation. Do wait. We will come to the questions at the end of it. Dr. Mansi, if you are there, we had already introduced you. Your topic is home blood pressure. Are you ready? Home blood pressure, new and gold standards. Mansi Kaushik.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Nayak, for introducing me. And thank you, Dr. Kasriwal, sir, for inviting me to give a presentation today. So my topic is home blood pressure monitoring, the new gold standard. As we all know that hypertension is the major risk factor for CVD. So, and the diagnosis of hypertension is primarily done by office blood pressure. So accurate measurement of blood pressure is essential for the diagnosis and management of hypertension. But various studies have shown that there is substantial difference in blood pressure when measured outside office versus in office settings. As Dr. Hardeep has already discussed in detail about the ABPM, that is ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, which is considered to be the reference standard for out of office measurement. But the another entity, that is home blood pressure monitoring, it is a reliable alternative when ABPM is either not available or not tolerated by the patients, particularly during sleep. Now, what is home blood pressure monitoring? The measurement of blood pressure by an individual outside an office setting, that is at home, is called home blood pressure monitoring. It can be done by self or by observer. Now, before going into detail of the home blood pressure monitoring, let's have let's have a look at the scientific data available to support this. Now, home blood pressure monitoring, is it a reliable tool for the diagnosis of hypertension? Yes. 2017 guidelines of American College of Cardiology recommended the use of out-of-office measurement of blood pressure, including home blood pressure monitoring, to confirm the diagnosis of hypertension, and also for titration of BP-lowering medication in conjunction with clinical interventions and tele-counseling. Now coming to whether home blood pressure help in CVD risk prediction, yes, there is evidence. This study, home versus ambulatory and office blood pressure, predicted the target organ damage correlation similar in home BP as well as in the ambulatory BP, and this correlation was superior to that of office measurement. This another study, it was a practice-based study that demonstrated the nighttime systolic blood pressure obtained using a home device and is the predictor of incident of CVD events, which is independent of in-office and the morning in-office systolic blood pressure measurement. The famous J-HOPE study. This study, morning home BP, showed a positive linear correlation with the cardiovascular events, especially the stroke. And this association was not observed for clinic blood pressure or the evening home blood pressure. Now coming to the effectiveness of self-measured blood pressure in lowering the blood pressure. So self-measurement of blood pressure at home showed a better control of blood pressure compared to the usual care for the initial 6 months. But later, like beyond 12 months, there was no long-term benefit, which was shown by this meta-analysis. However, another study done by Tucker et al. Gave the evidence of moderate reduction in systolic as well as diastolic blood pressure over 12 months and beyond, when home blood pressure was accompanied with co-interventions like patient education, lifestyle management, telehealth counseling, etc. So with the background of this scientific knowledge, we come to the conclusion that home blood pressure monitoring is an evidence-based approach. That is measuring home blood pressure is measuring out of office blood pressure and is considered to be the part of diagnosis and management of hypertension. Now, before coming in detail of the home blood pressure measurement, let's have a quick look at the frequent terms which we use in relation to hypertension. The white coat hypertension, though Dr. Hardeep has already covered everything about it, but just the definition of these terms: having office blood pressure in the hypertensive range, but out of office in the normotensive range. The important is that patient is not taking any antihypertensive medication. The white coat effect, similar to white coat hypertension, that is office BP is high and out of office is in the normal range, but patient is taking antihypertensive medication. Masked hypertension. So the mean out of office blood pressure is in the hypertensive range in a patient, and office hypertension is in the normal range and patient is not on any medication. Marked uncontrolled hypertension, the patient who are taking antihypertensive medication show normal blood pressure in the office, but out of office hypertension are blood pressure readings are high. Pseudo-resistant hypertension. Patients who are on multiple drug therapy for hypertension, they're having resistant hypertension based on the office readings, but out of office readings are in the normotensive range, which label them as resistant hypertension, but actually there are pseudo-resistant hypertensives. Now coming to the clinical indications of home blood pressure monitoring. The home blood pressure monitoring is used similarly to ambulatory BP monitoring to assess the presence of white coat hypertension or masked hypertension, to judge the medical efficacy in the treated patient, assessing the white coat effect, masked uncontrolled hypertension, or pseudo-resistant hypertension. Now, since ABPM is another modality of out of BP measurement, let's have a quick look at the conceptual difference between the two. So what measurement in home blood pressure monitoring are taken for several days to weeks, whereas in ambulatory BP monitoring, measurement of BP is done over a period of 24 hours. Home BP monitoring is done when patient is awake and at rest in sitting position, whereas ABPM patient measurement is done when patient is awake or sleeping or doing his regular daily activities. In home BP monitoring, patient is aware of his readings, whereas in ambulatory, patient is not aware of his blood pressure readings. Then home BP monitoring is triggered manually by the patient, whereas ambulatory, the device automatically records the BP. Now, no modality is free of challenges. HBPM2 have its own challenges. The most and the common challenge is that there are many devices available in the market, but they are not validated properly. Some devices do not automatically record the BP measurements, and so we have to rely on patient's documentation. And patient might not report or document their blood pressure properly because patients have a tendency of rounding off the values. Like if it's 122 or 124, they'll write it 128 by 82, they'll write it 80. It's like that. So also since patient is aware of the his blood pressure readings, this may lead to anxiety due to preoccupation with one's BP, and patient develop a tendency to keep on checking his blood pressure after every stressful event in life. Now, when we advise the patient to measure or record home BP, then we need to actually educate him how to do it correctly to get a reliable reading. First is preparation of the patient. Ask the patient should have an empty bladder. He should rest quietly and be in seated position for at least 5 minutes before recording his blood pressure. He should not talk or text at that time. So the journal instructions for the blood pressure management, instructions for blood pressure measurement, whether it's in home or in the office, are that patients should not have smoked, exercised, drink caffeinated beverages or alcohol within 30 minutes of measurement. He should rest in chair for 5 minutes with both feet on ground, arms resting on the side of chair or on a table in front of him. Legs should not be crossed, and BP cuff should be placed on the bare arm and not over the cloth. Now, patient should be taught how to palpate the brachial artery in the antecubital fossa, and the center of the bladder of the cuff should be placed over the arterial pulsation of the patient's left arm above the bend of the arm, above the elbow. The cuff should be pulled taut with a comparable tightness of the upper edge and the lower edge around the bare upper arm. The cuffed arm be relaxed and supported with the flat surface as shown in the figure. Now, how many number of readings per day and what should be the duration of monitoring? So patient is asked to take 4 readings every day, 2 readings in the morning, 1 minute apart before taking antihypertensive medication, and 2 readings in the evening before going to bed, 1 minute apart. The preferred monitoring period should be equal to or more than 7 days, that is 28 readings in all, or at least a minimum of 3 days, that is 12 readings. but some studies suggest to discard the first day reading. So in that case, patient is advised to record his blood pressure for 8 days or 4 days, respectively. Now, how to interpret the readings of home blood pressure monitoring? For each monitoring period, the average of all the systolic blood pressure and the average of all the diastolic blood pressure are taken to obtain or assess the blood pressure. Now, the eyeballing method, that is visually scanning the readings and looking for the presence of some high readings or the normal readings, should be avoided. Since readings of home BP monitoring is different from the office BP monitoring, so even the target threshold should also be different for both these modalities. So the effort to identify an appropriate threshold for defining hypertension have focused on awake BP levels for home BP monitoring. 3 main approaches have been used in prior studies, which determine the normative values for blood pressure. These are distribution derived approach. In this, the percentile of the blood pressure distribution is taken. Regression derived approach, some studies took the regression derived approach, which means that the more than two variables are taken and the relation between them is seen. In this case, like the blood pressure recorded by home BP monitoring, by ambulatory BP monitoring, and in office monitoring. The third one is outcome derived approach. So the outcome derived approach identifies the threshold of the BP by home monitoring, which correspond to the same level of risk that specified by a pre-specified by a in-office reading. Now, the corresponding values of systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure for office and self-measured blood pressure at home. So for lower BP values like normal 120/80 or 130/80, it was same for office blood pressure as well as for home blood pressure. As the BP goes high, that is 140/90, the corresponding blood pressure of office blood pressure of 140/90, the home blood pressure was found to be 135/85. Same 160/100 in the office setting, and at home setting, it corresponded to 145/90 millimeter of mercury. The precise relationship between office readings, ABPM, and home BP monitoring are still unsettled, but there is general agreement that office BPs tend to be higher than ABPM and HBPM BPs, especially at higher levels or the higher BPs. Now, once we advise a patient to record his home blood pressure, he would ask you to suggest for the suggestions which device to buy. So the preferred device is an upper arm cuff oscillometric device that has been validated. Now, use of a device that can actually automatically store all the readings, so the patient doesn't have to document his reading. Or another advanced device that can actually print or send the blood pressure values electronically to the healthcare provider. And the most important is use of cuff that appropriately sized for the patient arm circumference, because most of the devices, they come with a regular adult size cuff, which might not suit every patient. So we need to help patient to determine the correct cuff size as well. So when patient come to your office, you asked the support staff to measure his mid-arm circumference, and according to the mid-arm circumference, the size, bladder width, and the bladder length of the cuff is informed to the patient. Now, the most important part in the home BP measurement is teach pair. So it's not wise to assume that once we have taught the patient is actually measuring his blood pressure according to what we have instructed him. So every time patient comes, it is advisable, ask him to carry his device with him, ask the patient to measure his blood pressure in front of you to see whether he's measuring it properly or not. And that will also help in calibrating the device with the validated device of the office. Now, some special population who may be benefited from home blood pressure monitoring. Elderly, as we all know, they have high BP variability, and white coat hypertension is common in them. Diabetics, they need a tight blood pressure control, and home blood pressure monitoring is helpful in such cases. Pregnancy for the detection of early preeclampsia, and chronic kidney disease. In such patients, BP fluctuates a lot, and home BP monitoring helps in its management. And children. In children, white coat hypertension occurs, and there is enough data on normal home blood pressure level at different stages. So the take-home message, HBPM is a validated approach to measure out-of-office BP and is recognized as an important tool in the diagnosis and management of hypertension. Higher self-measured blood pressure is associated with increased cardiovascular risk. Now, there is lack of strong evidence to show whether HBPM and HBPM or ABPM, whosoever is superior, and vice versa for predicting cardiovascular risk. HBPM is cost-effective, enhances self-care and compliance, and use of upper arm cuff oscillometric device that has been validated if advised. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Mansi Kaushik, for that extensive coverage on home blood pressure monitor, which is a topic normally we don't include in discussions. And I think people should know more and more about home BP monitoring. This is a very important mode of monitoring high blood pressure, because like you said, it's so cost effective. You know, you can use the same instrument over and over again. And there are so many advantages. It doesn't jar you out of sleep and all that. I think it's very comfortable, and the new instruments are good. But before we take up the questions, I think we would go to the last topic of the day, and that is pulse wave velocity. You know, we had been talking about pulse wave velocity. I think Dr. Kasliwal had been the doyen of bringing pulse wave velocity concept onto India. And he was one of the first to start and publish papers. And then nobody really knew about the stiffness of arteries. And now everybody knows and talks about it. And the topic is pulse wave velocity, state of the art today. And to talk about that, we have Dr. Madhu Mins. She is a senior consultant cardiologist at Medanta. And she's a graduate of St. John's, an MD from Patna Medical College, and a fellow in non-invasive cardiology. She is the resource person for the academic section for the DNB postgraduates. So Dr. Madhu Mins, please.
So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Dr. Kasliwal for giving me an opportunity today to talk to all of you on this topic, pulse wave velocity. And thanks a lot, Dr. Taini Nair, for introducing me. So my topic for today is pulse wave velocity. So I would like to start my topic for today by saying that Thomas Sydenham, he was the first to describe arterial health. He was the first to describe arterial health way back in 17th century, when he had said that a man is as old as his arteries. This aphorism was later taken up by This aphorism was later on reintroduced by Nelson et al. When they said that this concept, they reintroduced this concept, and since then this has come into focus for research and clinical activities. So stiffness of the arteries is a cumulative measure of the damaging effects due to the presence of known and unidentified risk factors on the arterial wall. Arterial stiffness is also one of the earliest manifestation of vascular damage, arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis. So before I start about talking about arterial stiffness, it will be justified if I just talk about a little bit of the pathophysiology of the arterial stiffness and how it causes hypertension. So this diagram shows that because of the relation between vascular function and structural changes which happens in arterial stiffness, which gives rise to hypertension. So as we grow older, because of environmental stress and because of activation of renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system and activation of sympathetic nervous system, there is molecular and cellular process in the vasculature are impaired. This leads to endothelial dysfunction, inflammation, vascular remodeling, leading to arterial stiffness. This in turn gives rise to blood pressure. Increase in blood pressure has in turn shown that it promotes stiffness and vascular injury. So coming to the vascular phenotype in this arterial stiffness, if we look at this diagram, we can see that every layer of the arterial wall gets affected because of arterial stiffness. So in the endothelium, we know the endothelium is the most important part of the arterial wall, which is a single monolayer, which has multiple function now, just besides being just a barrier. So during arterial stiffness, what happens when the arteries, they age and there are multiple compounding factors which causes arterial stiffness, there is reduced endothelial relaxation, increased inflammation, increased permeability, and it produces a prothrombotic status. In the intima, we can see there is increased collagen deposition, macrophages, and calcification. Vascular media also undergoes changes wherein we see vascular smooth muscle growth, increased contraction, decreased relaxation, inflammation, calcification, and reduction in elastin. Adventitia, which is one of the most important component of this vessel wall, there we see that remodeling is taking place with increase in collagen, reduction in elastin, increase in fibronectin, increased proteoglycan, increased inflammation, increased MMPs and TIMPs. So in this layer, we see that elastin, which has the function of maintaining the compliance and the structural integrity of the arteries, here the collagen level goes up and the elastin level goes down. So this ratio change has by and large, that is the main role to play and is the hallmark of arterial stiffness. So final impact on the arteries of a hypertensive patient, an aged artery would look like they'll have endothelial dysfunction, there'll be increased media and lumen ratio, vascular remodeling, increased stiffness, vascular inflammation, and calcification. So how do we assess this? How do we assess arterial stiffness? The gold standard for assessment of arterial stiffness is pulse wave velocity, which is a well-validated index of arterial stiffness and is derived from carotid and femoral pulse waveforms. Then there's augmentation index and central aortic pressure. These are all called tissue biomarkers nowadays. So what is a pulse wave velocity? Whenever the LV contracts, a pulse pressure is generated, which travels along the aorta as a wave. So if we know the distance between the 2 points, and we know the time it has taken to travel to that point, knowing the velocity equation which says velocity is equal to distance by time, so we can calculate the velocity. We can calculate the velocity from the delay between two waves located at two different sites if the distance between the measuring site is known. So if we know the distance between these 2 points and the time taken, we can calculate the velocity. And this is the most validated measure of arterial stiffness nowadays. So what is pulse wave velocity? Pulse wave velocity is the speed at which the arterial pulsation wave travels along the vascular tree. According to biomechanics, Moen-Schottgert equation, it relates the pulse wave velocity to elastic module, vessel diameter, the vessel radius, and the blood density. So looking at the equation, we can make out that if the vessel wall thickens or if the diameter decreases, velocity of the pulse wave velocity will definitely increase. Basically, what it means is stiffer the artery, faster will be the pulse wave velocity. So what happens? So what happens is whenever the LV contracts, a forward wave is generated. and which propagates through the arterial wall, and it travels in the vasculature tree till it confronts either a branch, a bifurcation, or a lumen change, or any turbulence in the arteries. So at that point, that wave will reflect back. And the final wave which comes back is basically a sum of the forward wave and the reflected wave. So in a normal vascular physiology, if we look at that, whenever the heart contracts, whenever the LV contracts, a pulse is generated, and it will travel through the compliant arteries at the normal speed, the normal pulse wave velocity being, let's say, 8 meters per second. The wave will propagate through the arterial tree till it meets a obstruction somewhere or bifurcation of branch, and then it will get reflected back. So in a normal vascular physiology, there is a very nice, meticulously synchronized relation between the heart and the arterial tree. So when the reflected wave, generally it reaches the left ventricle, the aorta, in the diastolic phase, because the arteries are very compliant and the pulse wave velocity is slow. So it will come back and hit the forward wave during the diastolic phase. So the precise timing of the reflected wave is very important in relation to the cardiac cycle, because that decides the efficiency of the cardiovascular system. So whenever the forward wave, so when the LV contracts, there's a forward wave which moves through the arterial tree in a compliant wave, and it comes back during the diastole. So when in the diastole, when it comes back, it will augment the diastolic blood pressure. This augmentation of diastolic pressure is very crucial for enhancing the coronary blood flow. This happens in a normal vascular physiology. But what happens if the arteries have become rigid? So when the arteries have become rigid, the pulse wave velocity increases. So when the artery when the LV contracts, the wave will propagate, but it comes back immediately because the velocity is increased. So it will come back immediately, and it will hit the forward wave during the systole itself. So the wave goes during the systole, and it comes back in the systole itself. So it will hit the forward wave in the systolic phase itself, and it will eventually increase the systolic pressure here. So the final waveform in the normal artery, we see the forward wave and the reflected wave. The reflected wave has come back and hit the forward wave during the diastolic phase, and it increases the diastolic pressure. Whereas in the stiff arteries, the forward wave is hit back by the reflected wave during the systolic phase itself, so it augments the systolic blood pressure. So the central aortic pressure is basically what we just saw, is a sum of forward wave and returning wave. And the timing of the returning wave, that actually determines the final central aortic pressure. So original aortic pulse pressure, and this is the reflected wave resulting in augmentation of the diastolic pressure. This is what a normal wave would look like. So in the stiff arteries, what happens when the wave returns back during the systolic phase? There's increase in systolic pressure because the reflected wave has hit the forward wave during the systolic phase, increasing the systolic blood pressure. There'll be a decrease in diastolic pressure. In comparison to a compliant artery, when there's a reflected wave is coming back during the diastolic phase, and there's augmentation of the diastolic pressure. So coming to central augmentation pressure now. So if we all know the pulse pressure is the difference between systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. What is augmentation pressure? That is basically the height of the late systolic pressure above the initial waveform. So if we know the initial central aortic pressure waveform and we know the final central aortic pressure waveform, the difference between these two waves is the augmentation pressure. Okay, and if we divide this by the pulse pressure, that will give us the augmentation index. And what is this? This central augmentation, what is it? It is basically that quantifies the contribution of the reflected wave to central aortic pressure. So this has also been validated as an indirect measure of arterial stiffness. We have to remember that because of the molecular, cellular, and histological changes in the arteries as we move distally from the aorta till our limb arteries, and the arteries become more rigid as we go further away from the elastic aorta to more muscular arteries in the limbs. So the waveform will also differ as aorta, carotid, brachial, the radial arteries. The waveform also becomes different because of the amplification of the pressure waveform. We have to remember this concept. And that's the reason why the brachial blood pressure is not same as the central aortic pressure. Because, and we have to remember that the heart and brain are exposed to central aortic pressure, not the brachial pressure. That's why central aortic pressure is much, much more important when we treat a patient or we diagnose a patient as a hypertensive. So many studies, many line of evidences are there, which has shown that the aortic central pressure is so much more important than the brachial pulse pressure. The expert consensus, which was published in European Heart Journal in 2006, said that because of pulse pressure amplification between central and peripheral arteries, it is inaccurate to use brachial pulse pressure as a surrogate for aortic or carotid pulse pressure. Also in 2003, European Society of Hypertension, it mentioned that aortic blood pressure may be different from that measured in the arm and may be a better predictor of outcome and may be differently affected by antihypertensive drugs. So what are the clinical implications of this? So whenever there's a premature return of the reflected wave in the late systole, that increases the central pulse pressure, it puts a load on the LV and it increases the myocardial oxygen demand. So increase in systolic blood pressure will lead to LV afterload, leading to LVH. And of course, the cerebral circulation is exposed to very high systolic blood pressure. Decrease in diastolic blood pressure will reduce coronary perfusion, leads to subendocardial ischemia, and also reduce cerebral perfusion. All this will lead to increased central aortic pulse pressure, leading eventually to nephropathy, ESRD, LVH, CAD, congestive heart failure, stroke, cognitive impairment, and dementias. So several lines of evidences are there now to show that aortic stiffness has a very good predictive ability for assessment of cardiovascular risk. Many longitudinal studies, reviews have been written, and many studies have been published, which shows a clear linkage between arterial stiffness and risk of CV events. Many studies have said that pulse wave velocity is a strong predictor of CV events and all-cause mortality. Laurent et al. He had followed 1980 patients for almost 9 years, and he stated that increase in 5 meter per second pulse wave velocity is equivalent to aging of 10 years in terms of mortality risk. Many studies have shown that aortic pulse pressure and extent of CAD have clear correlation. Very famous strong heart study also showed that central BP is strongly related to vascular diseases and outcomes. So how do we measure this arterial stiffness? Many devices have come up now. We either do a carotid femoral or a brachial ankle pulse wave velocity measurement. In our hospital, we have this periscope, and the result sheet looks something like this. So we have some, what we need to do is we need to enter the name of the patient, name, sex, age, height, and weight of the patient. And we also do enter the lipid profile of the patient. He has to be in a resting state, supine position, and at least rest for 5 to 10 minutes before we start the test. He has to abstain from smoking and having alcohol at least for 10 hours before we do the test, and avoid any caffeinated beverages. He has to relax before we start the test. So we tie 4 cuffs in all the 4 limbs, and the final result, and that's what is needed to be done. And the final result will look something like this. What we get is ECG gated pressure waveform of all the 4 limbs. We also get to see brachial ankle pulse wave velocity, which we now know is a well-studied measure of arterial stiffness. We also get to see carotid femoral pulse wave velocity. We get to see ankle brachial index, which established measure of lower limb arterial disease. We get to see estimated central aortic pressure, and augmentation index, which is an indirect measure of arterial stiffness. So one simple sheet of paper and a test which hardly takes 10 minutes gives us all kind of information about the waveforms, the pulse wave velocities, the ankle brachial pulse wave, the carotid femoral pulse wave, the ankle brachial index, the central aortic pressure, and the augmentation index. Ankle brachial index also is a very, very important indicator of lower limb arterial disease. And we have to remember that in any patient, if we are doing the brachial ankle pulse wave velocity, we have to see that if the ABI is more than 0.9, then we should avoid doing this particular test. So arterial stiffness, how do we apply it in our clinical practice? It is used for cardiovascular risk stratification in patients with premature CVD, family history of premature CVD, sleep apneas, diabetics, CKDs, dyslipidemia, smokers, COPDs, and in patients with hypertension with or without target organ damage. It's used for evaluation, management, and follow-up of those patients. In our own institute in Medanta, the Medicity, Dr. Kasliwal and his team had done a study of hypertension and pulse wave, an Indian experience, where they had stated that arterial stiffness is significantly increased among hypertensives and is positively correlated with both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. All measures of arterial stiffness improve with control of blood pressure. Assessment of arterial stiffness may thus be helpful in tracking vasculoprotective effects of antihypertensive therapy in clinical practice. So if we combine pulse wave velocity and carotid intima thickness, it's an excellent marker of CAD, almost 91% sensitive for diagnosing CAD. And if both are abnormal, if pulse wave velocity and CIMT both are abnormal, they are associated with 67% likelihood of finding atherosclerotic disease in coronary artery disease. So that brings me to the interventions to reduce arterial stiffness. So lifestyle management is the mainstay of treatment, where we ask the patients for exercise, yoga, weight reduction, dietary changes, low salt diet, moderate alcohol, smoking cessation, fish oil, L-arginine, and of course, control of all risk factors like diabetes, dyslipidemia, obesity, and control of inflammatory disease state, and control of the blood pressure. So when we advise the antihypertensive drugs in patients with high central aortic pressure, it is seen that AC inhibitors and calcium channel blockers, they do much better than beta blockers and diuretics. The CAFE study, which was part of the ASCOT, which had 2,000 patients, it also showed that ACE inhibitors and calcium channel blockers had 30% less CV events than the beta blocker arm, and augmented pressure was reduced by ACE inhibitors and calcium channel blockers, but not by beta blockers. Even the SPRINT study, which was published in 2019, that stated that better survival of individuals seen when pulse wave velocity responded to antihypertensive treatment, independent of systolic blood pressure reduction. And they also suggested that the role of markers of arterial stiffness as an effective treatment target in patients with hypertension. So my take-home message would be, increased arterial stiffness is associated with end organ damage and is independent predictor of severe risk. Central BP is pathophysiologically more relevant to CAD than the corresponding peripheral BP. Current non-invasive, validated, and easy-to-use techniques can estimate central BP and wave reflection indices with a good reproducibility. And the assessment of central BP together with aortic pulse wave velocity may give new additional data for the stratification of severe risk in the management of hypertension and CVD. Thanks a lot for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Madhu, for that excellent talk. I think it is one of the best pulse wave velocity lectures that I have heard in the recent times. You were so clear, and you brought out almost every point. So I think before we take up a couple of questions, I would request all the presenters to join back so that we can just maybe chat for about 5 minutes so that we can have each other's opinion. So Dr. Grewal, I start with you because you put forward the ambulatory blood pressure concept so well. In fact, I think that is very, very important. See, one point that we are learning now is that if we look in a big picture, okay, right, the daytime blood pressure and ambulatory blood pressure is driven by sympathetic, okay, right. we are now all active and we are looking at the screen, we are all sympathetic active. So our blood pressure is determined by sympathetic. Now, the moment we go to sleep, the sympathetic slowly changes over and hands over our blood pressure, not exclusively, but kind of, to the renin-angiotensin system, the volume and the salt. Okay. So the moment we go to bed, our blood pressure handling gradually shifts. Can everyone mute, please? Those who are not talking. Thank you. So they hand over the sympathetic system to the renin-angiotensin salt. And that is what we see, the gradual dip of the nocturnal blood pressure to the bottom, and then it stabilizes. So overall picture gives us an idea as to how this shift occurs. And that is the main thing that we look into ambulatory BP. Now, do not forget that in the ambulatory BP, you also have a line below, which is the heart rate. And that heart rate actually indicates the sympathetic state of activities. So people whom you see in that ambulatory BP, the heart rate going down at night and becoming normal, they're kind of sympathetic driven in the morning. So not just the systolic and the diastolic blood pressure, the heart rate gives us quite a lot of information regarding what happens to its sympathetic system as it goes on to bed. For example, that is the reason why when people wake up, the sympathetic charges up again, and there's an early morning spike of blood pressure. So Dr. Kasliwal is there. Dr. Kasliwal, any thoughts about ambulatory blood pressure's ability to tell us about the underlying pathophysiology of shift of control from sympathetic to renin-angiotensin? And would you take an ambulatory blood pressure to determine what kind of medications we are putting it in?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Tani, you and Dr. Hardeep have put everything in perspective. Some of the people who attend my OPDs, I give a lot of importance to the morning surge, I call it, because that's when the strokes and heart attacks are taking place. So the morning sympathetic drive, the morning surge, and this vital information is given by ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. So in the course of our, at least when we are treating hypertensive patients, in the course of a year, I do at least 1 or 2 ambulatories for sure, and definitely to begin with, because many of them are not convinced and they say, no, sir, I've come here. As you said, white coat hypertension, I don't much believe in it. But I think one of the important things that has to also be stressed is those who have obstructive sleep apnea. And there, the home blood pressure, the ambulatory BP monitor gives a big information, because some of these people become actually non-dippers. And non-dipping physiology or pathology, as you may call it, definitely predisposes you to stroke, for example, or to MI, for example. Because very rightly, from sympathetic, when we are going to angiotensin to ACE problem, some of these may continue to have high pulse rate because of the sleep apnea. So I think
absolutely, correct. And I also appreciate Dr. Grewal for bringing out the exact point as to who should have an ambulatory blood pressure, because India is not Medanta, right? You have an access to the best of technologies and the best of brains, and people can afford it. But as you spread out in the larger part of India, ambulatory blood pressure is not available in smaller hospitals, and they can't prescribe it for everyone. So we tell our residents that when your target organ damage and your estimated BP in the office don't match, they are not in sync, think of ambulatory blood pressure, right? So you see somebody is a young person's blood pressure is very high, but he has no target organ damage, no albuminuria, he is fine, his retina is normal, no CVA, nothing. Think of it might be a white coat hypertension and do an ambulatory blood pressure. In contrast, you have somebody whose blood pressure is barely 140/90 and he has left ventricular hypertrophy, for example. Today, at least everyone comes with an ECG, left ventricular hypertrophy. So again, you have a discordance between the office measured blood pressure and your target organ damage. Do an ambulatory blood pressure, because it might show that there is a masked hypertension. And today we are talking about masked hypertension giving rise to so much of long-term dementia, long-term dementia. In fact, if today we tell our neuro colleagues that if you find somebody with a little dementia, not the frank dementia, but somebody who comes and the wife says that husband forgets my birthday, husband forgets mobile phone, spectacles, where he puts his keys, do a mini mental scale and they will have abnormality. Those kind of dementia very often are associated with an masked hypertension. So we always tell them that send them to us so that we can do a ambulatory blood pressure and rule out a masked hypertension. I think that takes us to the home blood pressure monitor. But the first thing is that when you started your lecture, the first slide, you said that there are a lot of people who will not tolerate ABPM. I'm very clear that they should have a home BP monitor. But in a patient who tolerates ABPM, he says, I have no problem. Would not you advise home BP? See, apart from the cost involved, today we understand that when we talk about ABPM, a lot of patients actually, everybody could come and say, I woke up when the blood pressure cuff was inflating at night in the ABPM. So it is not a true nocturnal blood pressure, but the nocturnal awake blood pressure, right? So in that, if he at bedtime with the wife puts his blood pressure cuff and sees, I mean, home BP might give you a better relaxed picture compared to ABPM, which wakes him up at night 3 o'clock. That is one of the concepts that is coming in. The second thing is recently there was a paper that was presented in the European Society of Cardiology meeting where they're trying a new home blood pressure apparatus, which is one you wear in your arm, and then at bedtime you press the button and then just go to bed. So in the next 10 minutes, it measures the blood pressure and then goes to sleep. The next measurement comes exactly 6 hours later, just before you wake up. So even if that wakes you up, you get an early morning just before you wake up blood pressure. So they say that these two, they try to interpolate that, and the data says that if you just have the night blood pressure before you go to bed and the early morning that you wake up, would give you a trajectory exactly similar to an ambulatory blood pressure by a much, much, much cheaper cost. How commonly do you do in your center home blood pressure monitor, because you are so much in the ambulatory blood pressure atmosphere?
Yeah, we do a lot of times, especially in the outstation patient who contact us through video calling or on phone or by email, and patient living in the remote areas who don't have access to ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. We very frequently advise them to record their blood pressure monitoring and upload them, or come back with a chart of their blood pressure and all. So we do advise home blood pressure monitoring.
Because I don't know, Dr. Kasliwal can add on to that. The main challenge we are facing is if we just advise the patient that you measure at home, he buys the cheapest blood pressure apparatus in Amazon. And that is just like a child's toy. That will show some value of something unusual. But if you use the we had done that ABPM trial that you mentioned, that home BP we did with MicroLife, that records 3 blood pressure measurements in tandem, measures it first time, then doesn't show anything on the screen, gives a 30-second gap, then measures again, 30-second gap and measures again. And finally, you see a number coming up, which is the average of these 3. And that goes into the machine's memory. So when the patient brings back this machine to us, you just hook it and you get the 1 week's average with the first day, 8 days, first day taken away, and totally you don't need to calculate anything. So that problem, like you said, people tend to round off 128 by 86, you would say 120/80. That doesn't really happen. What is your experience, Dr. Kasliwal, on
no, Tony, I always tell people to take home blood pressure monitoring. It's very helpful. See, ambulatory blood pressure monitoring will occur once a year or once in 2 years, or at some juncture when we require it to be done. But and particularly I've seen this during this pandemic, when people are so stressed, just sitting at home, locked them at home. They need to know whether, and the matrix is they were not hypertensive or they were hypertensive on medication or inadequate medication. We can actually monitor their doses, titrate their doses. But what we do is that before that, we spend time in telling them exactly how to take the blood pressure. Otherwise, they will have this hand hanging down and their other phone, with the other hand, they're on the phone. All this doesn't work. We tell them to take it easy for 10 minutes before they actually get on their desks, put their hands like, so the whole thing is there. And then whatever instrument they get hold of, generally they say Omron or Circa 120/80. These are good instruments. And I found it really very useful. I really found it useful. And I do tell them that please don't become addicted to it. That at every point of time, you're just taking the blood pressure. Also, what is happening right now that people have pulse ox at home. So they will also be able to give you the heart rate and of course the PO2. So I think there is huge need for home blood pressure monitoring. And I first read this at the the European Heart meeting 4 or 5 years ago and I said, well, this is actually the new gold standard. That's why we had this topic. So we find it very useful actually.
So initially, when we talked about the masked hypertension to the Western society meetings, they were all laughing at us.
Yeah.
Today we know that with all our studies, ABPM study, Indian Heart Study, we have masked hypertension to the tune of what, 19-20%.
Yeah.
While the Caucasians have about 7-8%. That's why most of the data comes from Southeast Asia on masked hypertension. Now they have incorporated all that masked hypertension. And one interesting thing is that a lot of Indian masked hypertension is unlike the West, where patients might be prescribed a short-acting medication in the morning, right? So the patient takes that morning pill and then comes to you by about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the OP. You see his blood pressure is controlled. You say, oh, your pill is working fine, right? But if you put him on an ambulatory blood pressure, this person's night blood pressure is significantly elevated. So by definition, they are not masked because they're already on medications. But today we call them drug-induced masked hypertensives. So their blood pressure in the office is controlled because they are taking a short-acting medication just before coming to like a short-acting diuretic maybe, or a short-acting CCB. But then at night, so they might be taking a nifedipine capsule in the morning or a tablet in the morning and nothing else. So by night, their blood pressure goes up. And very clear data today says that patients who are on drug-induced so-called masked hypertension, their outcome is worse than the de novo masked hypertension. So at least don't do harm if you're not doing good. I think we have a couple of questions. Before that, we have not talked about the pulse wave velocity because your center has done so much of job. See, today we are recognizing that there are two kinds of stiff arteries. One, those who are under hemodynamic stress. Okay, blood pressure has gone up, stiffened arteries and all that. Another kind is those who are metabolic driven. They may not have much of blood pressure, but they are diabetic, dyslipidemic, metabolic syndrome. So is there a difference between these two? Right, that means a person is not very hypertensive, but you still find a stiff artery, apart from giving them statins and all that. Do you really find any difference in their long-term outcomes? Dr. Madhu, you can talk, and of course, Dr. Kasliwal is there. Dr. Madhu,
rightly said, sir. So all these patients who are not yet hypertensive, but yet they still have metabolic syndrome and many other factors, risk factors, even low birth weight, low premature birth. So in those patients also, there are multiple studies which have now shown that their arteries are stiff, and it's called early vascular aging, EVA, what they have coined as. It was introduced in 2008, the terminology. So such patients who have arterial stiffness and they don't have hypertension, they have been categorized under early vascular aging. And the pathophysiology, everything is the same as in arterial hypertensive arteries. And even the changes which are happening inside the vessel wall, they are almost the same as what happens in those arteries.
And they have shown beautifully that even in the absence of hemodynamic stress, this kind of categories, in course of time, may develop atrial fibrillation, a large left atrium, and go in for an HFpEF. And that particular category where you have stiffness, but there's no hypertension and metabolic driven, they tend to do better with the MRAs and eplerenone and aldosterone. Dr. Kasliwal, any thought on that?
Doctor,
so much of knowledge on, yeah.
See, the point is that initially we used to believe that the pulse wave velocity has been made only for looking at hypertensive patients, and we realized very soon that this was wrong, in the sense that those patients, particularly I've seen in smokers, big time smokers, and those who are dyslipidemic, definitely have arterial stiffness without the blood pressure going up, and they have a worse outcome. Though I don't have a longitudinal study to say that, but the data definitely. The other thing is the EVA, that there is definitely early vascular aging. You see it from the face, and also, Dr. Nayak, these are the people who actually also have obstructive sleep apnea. We cannot take away the fact that obstructive sleep apnea today is an entity which is very important, and Neither the patient tells us, nor some of the doctors ask them. And so they just continue. So my brief answer is that pulse wave velocity is, of course, extremely good for hypertensives, but people with multiple risk factors without hypertension, it will also give you insight as to what is happening. And as you said, lo and behold, some of them will actually develop systemic hypertension if you did it actually even yearly. So I think the whole basis of this Jing Bang is actually insulin resistance. That's where everything comes from.
True,
And
true, absolutely, absolutely, including
that's what,
your OSA and that you're talking. See, for the residents who are listening, understand that the typical OSA that we used to teach people, that chubby, round, Cushing kind of face, and all that has gone away, right? People who are thin come, and then when we look at their sleep study, we find that, oh my God, they have OSA. So OSA is gradually becoming a part and parcel of the metabolic syndrome and the metabolic abnormality driven by insulin resistance, and with the EVA, what we are talking about. Couple of questions in the chat box. I think there are two. One is, I think this is for Dr. Hardeep, that what about, is there any contraindication for ABPM? Is there any contraindication for ABPM?
Okay, it's a good question. I personally believe that you can rule out the contraindication in the history itself. I mean, if there are patients who have history of clotting disorders or coagulopathy, I think I would not prescribe ambulatory BP monitoring in those patients. And another thing which is not really a contraindication, but I think which we need to take into account, patients who are of CKD patients who are on dialysis, because normally the blood pressure cuff is worn on non-dominant arm, but you have to take care if the patient is having AV fistula.
Yes.
In that case, then you have to take that thing into account. I think.
Absolutely, I think that answers that question. And the last question, I think that is probably for the home blood pressure monitor. You can see that in the chat box. How often do you need to calibrate the machine to get a reliable and accurate reading? I think they're probably asking about home blood pressure monitor.
yeah, most
Yeah.
likely. They
Most
ask for hormonal, yeah.
Probably the simple answer would be you should buy one that is clearly defined by the ACCHA or the EC certified machine, which are known to be the standard one that you use to measure. But these oscillometric, how do you calibrate with a non-oscillometric one? I am not sure. Can you do that now? I mean, you can probably, like we do, we check with both and say this is inaccurate and you don't use it. That is all that you can do, perhaps.
Yeah, that's all you can do, actually, in all fairness. If Dr. Bansal is there, we can ask him for what his views
I
are.
can't see him. Dr. Manish Bansal, are you there? So I think we are already reaching time. So maybe
very much
one
yes,
last
sir.
comment. Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Manish.
he's there.
So,
Dr.
so
Manish is
what is
I was
your
listening
comment
to
about? Yeah,
can-
your comment about ambulatory BP, home blood pressure, and vascular stiffness and pulse wave velocity.
Yeah.
Give us 2 or 3 take-home points before we.
actually, sir, I was listening to all the presentations and the very practically useful tips that you gave after the presentation. Only thing important is that, as you mentioned, we need to educate patients more and more about the value of home BP monitoring, how they need to do it, proper method, because unless we know actual blood pressure status, we'll not be able to treat it properly, and that is something which is grossly lacking. Specific points you've all already discussed in detail, so I wouldn't want to repeat the same thing. Bottom line is blood pressure control needs to improve in India.
Absolutely. So
Thank you. Absolutely.
before we end, what did I learn? I learned a lot about ambulatory BP. I learned about the nocturnal BP being so important. I learned about the indications and contraindications. And I think we should teach, like you said, not just patients, physicians to apply this technique so that we get more data. Home blood pressure is an alternative, not just an alternative, looks at a different aspect where you can have a long-term measurement of 7 to 8 days instead of the 24 hours. Though you don't get the nocturnal blood pressure and the nocturnal dip, but you get everything else and at a much, much cheaper cost. And the last presentation is a fascinating presentation on pulse wave velocity. We should all learn that pulse wave velocity today stands alone as one of the major risk factors, telling us not about an hypertension prognosis, but as a vascular aging process where exactly we are. With that, I hand over to Dr. Kasliwal for the final comments.
So I'll just say two words. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Nair. This was a fantastic. We had a lot to learn from your experience from Kerala, really. And of course, our senior cardiologists, all three of them were just amazing. Their review of literature and their presentation, extremely good. And I'm sure they had a lot to learn. And I take back Dr. Bansal's word that blood pressure control in India is totally inadequate. So on this World Hypertension Day, I think we should all resolve to tell as many people as we can, take it properly, take it properly, take it properly. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.